Okay guys, in this setup we are going to configure PfSense 2.2.2 release 64-bit. We're going to connect that to a Cisco 2950 24 port. And so what I have set up here, just to let you know my environment, I have a test setup of PfSense that's actually running in a virtual machine on VMware, and for our switch I'll be using Packet Tracer. Alright, let's go. So the first thing we need to do is we need to set up our VLANs. As a matter of fact, you know what? Let's set up a list here. I'm kind of big on lists. We'll kind of think this through our head, and then we'll go ahead and put it into effect. So the first thing we need to do is set up VLANs. VLAN or maybe LANs, depending on your configuration on. And I'm just going to be calling PfSense the router. I know it's a firewall, but we'll be calling it a router because it is a router too. Once we set those VLANs up, we need to assign those VLANs to an interface. Once we get those VLANs assigned to an interface, we need to set up the VLAN or set up the interfaces. So we'll set up the interfaces or interface or faces, depending on how many you're setting up. If you want to be able to communicate outside of that interface, you're going to need to set up some rules. So we'll go ahead and do that. So we'll set up rules on the interface or faces. Then we probably just want to be able to connect devices to it, have it pull an IP address, so we're going to need to set up dhcp. So we'll set up the Again, this is optional. You don't have to have DHCP, or you could be using an external DHCP server, but for us we'll be using PfSense for that. That should be it. So there's only 5 steps on PfSense. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started here. First, we're going to set up the VLANs. How you do that is you go to Assign under Interface. And here we're going to be using our LAN, so we'll notice that EM1 is the physical interface that's on our LAN. So we'll go ahead to VLANs right here. And we don't have any, so we'll go ahead and add one. And we need to choose our parent interface. We'll go ahead and we'll set up VLAN 100. Why not? You can go all the way up to 4094. You probably want to stay below 4000. Typically, anything above 4000 is reserved for your ISP. So, and we'll call this servers. Save that. We'll then come back and we'll create a second VLAN just so I can show you guys. We'll make that one 200. Could be VLAN 101. And we'll call this one wireless. I like to put my wireless on a separate VLAN than my actual LAN. And we'll save that. So we got 2 VLANs, VLAN 100 and VLAN 200. But they're not assigned to anything right now. So what we need to do is we need to assign those VLANs to an interface. So we'll go over here to interface assignment and we'll add an interface. So that's option 1. And notice here that in this particular version of PfSense, it automatically assigned VLAN 100 to that. Now I don't have to keep that on there. I could make that VLAN 200, but I'm going to keep that as 100. Then I'll go ahead and add another interface, which is option 2, and notice that automatically made option 2 VLAN 200. Again, you can swap those around if you want. I believe on older versions of PfSense, if you wanted to do this, you would then have to click apply and then save. But on this particular version, it's done. We don't even have to do anything. So let's look at step number 3, which is set up the interfaces. So we're going to go to interfaces, and now we see that we have option 1 and option 2. So we'll go here to option 1. We'll enable it, and we'll just call it servers. And since this is going to be directly connected to the router, obviously, we're going to set up an IPv4 address on it. So we'll say static, and we'll come down here, we'll give it 192.168.88.1. Choose something that's compatible with your network settings. 88 is compatible with mine. Typically, I don't assign a full class C, which is what I'm doing here. This is just for demonstration purposes. You could break that down to, say, a 27 if you wanted to. But here we'll just use a 24. Why not? We'll click save. We'll apply that. Now that interface is saved. So we'll go back through and we'll set up option 2. We'll enable that, and we set that up as wireless. So we'll call it wireless. And we'll give that an IP address of 192.168.89.1. And we'll do /24 on that. We'll click save and then apply. And now those interfaces are good to go. Next step is to set up rules on those interfaces. So we'll come here to firewall, then we'll go to rules, right? And we'll go here to server. Notice there's no rule right now. So if we didn't set up our rules, we could, after everything else, we could connect it to our switch. We'll be on that VLAN. However, we wouldn't be able to get online or do anything that we want to do because there's no rule. So the default rules will block everything except for the LAN. The LAN is the only one that comes with the automatic default rule to allow traffic out. So we'll come here, we'll say add, and we're just going to add anything. Don't have to be TCP. And we'll just say default allow all out rule. And we'll copy that so we don't have to type that twice. We'll click save. Apply. You probably don't have to apply every single time, but why not? You're there. We'll add the same rule for our wireless. And we'll apply that. If you were doing IPv6, you would have to add that as well. But in our example here, we'll just be doing IPv4. Alright. Lastly, you'll see here on the list is that we want to kind of set up dhcp that way. It's convenient for our users and ourselves, to be honest with you. So we'll come over here to services and we'll go down to dhcp server. And we'll come over to the servers over here and we'll enable this. Alright, now typically you don't want to give out the whole range. So we'll just say 192.168.88.100. And we'll go to the end of that scope. So we'll say 192.168.88.254. Leaving 2 through 99. We can assign that statically to other devices if we want. And we'll click save here. And that's done. Come over to wireless. We'll enable that. And we'll do something similar. We'll do 192.168.89.100 all the way to 192.168.89.254. What I didn't mention on the last one, but I'll mention it here. If you have your own WINS or DNS server, you can specify it here. If not, the router or your DHCP will automatically assign the router as the DNS server. WINS won't be used. We'll save that. Okay, now that's all set up. And now we are done with PfSense. So let's move this list over here. Now let's look at our switch. Let's come up with some, so we'll say switch setup. So the first thing we need to do is we need to create the VLANs on our switch. Once we create those VLANs, right, we then need to set up a trunk port so that connects back to our router. So we're going to set up a trunk port to connect back to the router. All right, now what Cisco calls a trunk port is actually a tagged port on every other switch manufacturer in the world, right? So if you're in a Cisco world, you may or may not know about tags. Whenever you set up a VLAN, you're actually setting up tag traffic. All right, and so the trunk port should probably only ever have tag traffic on it. Right. In the event that untagged traffic enters the trunk port, the switch will add whatever the native VLAN is to that frame. All right. Once we set up that trunk port, then we need to assign the ports to their respective VLAN. So we'll just say assign ports to their VLANs. All right. That's it, really. So let's get into it. So let me click on that. So here's our switch. All right, and what I do is the last port on the switch I make going to my router. All right. All my clients and servers, they'll start from port number 1 going towards the last port. All my trunk ports going to the router and maybe even other switches will start at the end and go back. That way you kind of converge in the middle. What you don't want to have is like, oh, this goes to host number 1, host number 2, server. This goes to another switch in another room or another side of the building, and this one goes to another server. It's kind of sloppy and it's bad for troubleshooting. So we'll go to the command line here and we'll go into enable mode. It will just do show VLANs just to show you that the switch here is blank. All ports are assigned to VLAN 1 and there are no trunk ports. And we do show switch ports trunk. This will, show interface trunk, I believe that is. We see that we don't have any trunk ports. So in newer versions of iOS, you can create the VLANs at the configure terminal screen. But what I'm going to use is the VLAN database. The reason for that is because it works on every version of Switch, whether you're using an older version or a newer version. So we'll say VLAN data, and that's short for database. If you hit the tab key, it automatically completes. We'll go in here and we'll say VLAN 100, and we'll give it a name, servers. You can call anything you want. Probably want to make it the exact same thing you did on your router. That way, for troubleshooting purposes, you got no issues. VLAN 200 for our second VLAN, and we'll give that a name of wireless. All right, and once you exit, the switch is going to write that information to the database. If we do show VLANs, we can see here now that we have a VLAN 100, which is our servers, and we have a VLAN 200, which is our wireless. But they're not assigned to anything, so pretty much useless right now. We'll do a Control C to break out of that. We'll go into our configure terminal. Once we're in configure terminal, we'll go into interface 24. Mine's only 100 megabit switch, so we'll say fast Ethernet 0/24. If you had a gigabit switch, it would be GI. Once we're in there, switch ports on Cisco Switch by default are set up for dynamic desirable, which basically means if the switch thinks, or if it sees that it's receiving tag traffic, then it'll set it up for a trunk port. If it's receiving nothing but untagged traffic, then it'll set it up for an access port. You don't want that. Set the switch up, set the port up for what kind of traffic you want it to receive. So on fast Ethernet 24, I'm going to say switch port mode trunk. Now this is a trunk port. All tag traffic will be on it. Right? Remember I was telling you about untagged traffic? Well, if you had a native VLAN, you would set that up here. It would just be switch port trunk, and I believe it's native VLAN, and then you would set that up for whatever you want. Remember, the native VLAN is whenever untagged traffic enters your trunk port, what VLAN should we put it on? We're not going to do that in this example. So now we got our trunk port, right? Set up a trunk port. We're at step number 3, which is assign ports to their VLANs. So we'll come back to the physical here. So for our example, we're going to set up ports 1 through 8 on VLAN 100, and we'll set up ports 9 through 16 on VLAN 200. Alright, so go back to the CLI. If you have an older switch, you're going to have to do each one individually. What I mean by that is you'll have to say INTFA0/1, and first thing you want to do is set it up for an access port. So we'll say switch port mode access. It means only untagged traffic should enter this port. Then we'll say switch port access VLAN 100. That's assigning that port to VLAN 100. Then you'll have to go INTFA0/2, and you have to do the same thing over again. Use your up arrow keys if you have an older switch. So we gave it an access, we set it to access. Now we're assigning it to VLAN 100. For us, or for me rather, I'm using a fairly newer, so I can use the interface range command. FA0/2, and I'll go all the way out to 8. I already did number 1, that's why I didn't choose number 1 here. And I'll say switch port mode access, and then switch port access VLAN 100. Then I'll go to port number 9. We'll go all the way out to 16. I'll set that up for. And then switch port access VLAN 200. Now, if you have an older switch, or even some of the newer switches, Cisco has their own VLAN encapsulation protocols called ISL. Nobody uses it. And if you ever want to talk to a device that's non-Cisco, you cannot use ISL. Right? And so if you have one of these devices, you might have to do one more command. And what that would be is switch port trunk encapsulation .1Q. Right. If I did this though, because I'm using a 2950, the only VLAN encapsulation that it does is .1Q, so you don't need to do that. Just wanted to throw that out there for anybody watching this that had a switch that was used in the ISL. Alright, after you do that, you're pretty much done. Alright, you want to hit end to go back. We'll do a copy running config to the startup config. That's how you kind of save. your information on a Cisco switch. You could also do a write mem, or you could do a copy, run start. They all do the same thing. And then just to confirm, you want to do show VLANs. Hey, we can see here that we have VLAN 100 and it's assigned to ports 1 through 8. And then we have VLAN 200 here, and that's assigned through ports 9 through 16. Right, you're all set. Lastly, right, is that at this point you probably are configuring your switch via a console cable, and you don't want to be in the room all the time when you have to configure your switch, so you might want to give it an IP address, right? And let's just say our management interface is VLAN 100. So what you need to do is you need to go back to your config T, and you want to go into interface VLAN 100. Notice here that the link changed from non-existent to up. It's because it didn't exist before. As soon as we created it, it went up. Right, it should have came back to the command line, but it didn't. I just hit enter. Now I'm back. Then we're going to assign it an IP address. Make sure it's in the same range as what you got your PfSense firewall set to. So if you see here, our VLAN 100 is servers, and if we go here, the router is 88.1. I typically like to make the next IP my switch, so I'll do IP address 192.168.88.2. Then you got to set up the subnet mask 255.255.255.0. Hit enter. Boom, it's good. Then you want to do a no shut. I know it said it was up, but just for GP you want to do that. Then move over to your interface VLAN 1, which is the default management interface, and you want to shut that one down if you're not using it. And there should be no spaces, just shut down. Alright, that's it. Now obviously your virtual terminal lines won't work until you set up a enable password, and then you have to set up the actual lines themselves. I'm not going to do that in this video. I'll probably make another video for that. But that's it, guys. Congratulations, your VLANs are created on your switch as well as your router. What you want to do at this point is you want to save it. If you're at this mode here, I'll show you a little trick. You can just do write mem, and you should be good to go there. But at this point, all you really need to do, let's go back here to our physical, is connect port number 24 to your LAN port on your PfSense router, and then you start connecting your devices to these ports, and you should be good to go. Thanks for watching. If you guys have any questions or comments, please leave them below.